Hey, it's Debbie Potts, and I am going to talk about a very important topic I think everyone should learn more about: heart disease, cholesterol, myths, facts. How can you take ownership of your health today? Starting age 40 something, we should be paying attention to what we're doing to be a health optimizer. Kind of what is biohacking? Someone asked me that yesterday. Biohacking are a way to improve our future self. To me, biohacking is an overused old term now. It's kind of not in, but I would say it's about taking ownership of your health, experimenting what works best for you. And it's N equals one experiment. But today we're talking to Stephen Hussey, how he took ownership of his health to help course correct some health issues he had with heart disease. And we'll talk more. So good information. Get ready to learn something new. Okay, guys, as I'm on a mission to help you improve how you age so you can be your best self in the future, live your second half of your life even better than your first half of your life, I finally connected with Stephen Hussey. Been trying to get him on the show, talked a few years ago, and really wanted to share some information, his story, because I think it's good motivator to do what you can do now so you can avoid chronic disease, as heart disease, and all this other stuff. So we're gonna dive into it. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. How are you?
I am good. It's Monday and we're recording this during middle December, so we're just getting started for the holidays craziness. And I think this is a good topic because I talk a lot about stress and addicted to busyness and endurance athletes that do everything too much. And so this is a good, hopefully, awakening for some people to know maybe I'm doing a little bit too much because our population are not I'm sedentary, I'm not doing anything. We're on the other side of the bell curve, doing too much of everything. And so trying to bring people to that Goldilocks effect to figure out what's best for them so they can look amazing, feel great, move well, have good lab results as they're 70, 80, 90 years old. And so you're a good person to talk to because there's a lot of confusion about cholesterol, heart disease, all this stuff. And I know you're very passionate about that. So explain a little bit of what you do and why.
Yeah. Well, um, I guess by training, I'm a chiropractor and I also have a master's in human nutrition and functional medicine. I like to say that those things didn't teach me much about anything that I know, those pieces of paper that tell me I did something, but they're useful to have. But yeah, I've always been interested in health, which is kind of why I went that direction in training. And that stems from my own personal health history of having chronic diseases as a child and being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 9, just kind of pushed me in that direction.
Mm.
And luckily for me, I got kind of an early skepticism of the Western medical approach, mainly because I was able to affect these chronic diseases I had as a kid with lifestyle, which I was never told by Western medicine.
Yeah.
So I've always been interested in health and was mainly controlling my health or achieving health, being fit or looking fit and healthy by diet and exercise. And I did that, throughout college and after chiropractic school and everything. And I again would say that I was generally healthy. And then about 4 years ago, I shockingly had a widowmaker heart attack, seemingly out of the blue. I'd always taken care of myself as a type 1 and managed my blood sugars. I was fit and healthy. And I actually had a CAC score done about 6 months prior to the heart attack, which is a measurement of how much calcified plaque there is in the arteries of your heart, which doesn't tell you about soft plaque, but it's said to be a good indicator of risk for heart attack. And mine was a perfect score of 0. There was no
Mm.
calcification in my arteries. And 6 months later, I had a widowmaker heart attack. There was a spontaneous clot that formed, 100% blockage of the left anterior descending artery in my heart. And there was things leading up to that I think caused it or contributed to it. because I don't think anybody will be able to tell me exactly what caused it, and that was definitely the case in the hospital. They were not able to tell me. They were just like, "Oh, it's cholesterol. Oh, it's cholesterol," and we'll talk all about that, I'm sure.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I think the dehydration, oxalate dumping, stress. I was stressed prior to this, and I got very stressful news about a close family member a day and a half before this happened. And then unwisely in that state, with those combination of things, I did a kind of a hit workout the morning I had the heart attack, and 20 minutes after the workout, the heart attack happened. And so in the hospital, I was told a lot of things. I mean, I was pretty demoralized. I was like, gosh, how could this have happened? Fortunately, I made it through, because only 12% of people who have those types of heart attacks outside a hospital setting survive. So I'm one of those 12%. But I was kind of asking them what they thought happened and everything, and they didn't really have many answers. They were just like, here's your recipe. Here's your medications you have to take the rest of your life. I was
Mhm.
told I would have to be on 5 medications the rest of my life.
Yeah.
They told me to eat the absolute worst diet I could imagine. That thankfully I knew that that was a bad diet they were recommending, and that it was based on the guidelines and stuff. And just not really impressed. And so that being in that system and experiencing it firsthand kind of reinvigorated me. And so I went home and did my own health healing routine, which I only took one medication for 6 months, which was a blood thinner, because there was a stent in my body that I didn't know how my body was going to react to. And so I took that for 6 months and then stopped, and I'm on no medications now. I'm not recommending that for anybody else. I'm just saying that's what I decided to do,
Mhm.
based on my information. And in 3 months, I did my own heart healing routine, which I'm sure we'll talk about what I did too. But my heart completely recovered. The damage has been healed. The conduction signal of the heart is normal again. The ejection fraction is normal again. But then about around that time, when I got that test 3 months after the heart attack, I started getting pain in my lower right leg on exertion. And because of the procedure they did to place the stent, I developed atherosclerosis in my thigh. So there was a narrowing of an artery in my thigh, and it was restricting the blood flow to my leg. So when I would exert myself, like even just walking fast to the airport, I would get pain in my lower leg. And so eventually, I mean, I didn't know what it was. I was like, what is this? Compartment syndrome, DVT, what's going on here? And eventually got it diagnosed, and it was peripheral artery disease in my leg. And at the time, they decided not to do anything about it because I could work, I could do most of my things. I just couldn't do some of the things I enjoy. Couldn't snowboard, couldn't hike, that kind of stuff. So we left it alone, but I continued doing this healthy artery routine that I was doing, which is very different than what I was being told by Western medicine. And in a year, the plaque had regressed from a 70 to 99% blockage of that artery to 50%, which I was told was impossible, especially in a type 1 diabetic. And then a year after that test where it went to 50%, it was completely normal. So I completely reversed plaque in an artery in my leg, which again, most people in Western medicine would tell you is impossible. And I did it, and I have the testing to prove it. So I think at that point I thought I was onto something, and I've kind of developed and researched a lot about the mechanisms of why I think this happened and how we actually protect arteries. And that's the information I'm sharing these days. I want people to know it so that they can make informed health decisions as well.
I think that's so important. I know we'll talk a lot about break it down, but it is being fit and healthy on the inside out is what the podcast focuses, and how we think we're invincible because we can go for a 50-mile bike ride and we're active, we're doing all the right things. But how do you know if there's something broken or out of balance, out of whack, unless you do testing? What are some signs and symptoms that you might know that you wish you knew back then that you want to share?
Yeah, well, I over the years I've kind of come to the conclusion that testing is not going to tell you if you're healthy or not, or testing is not going to tell you if you're at risk of something or not. It can give you an idea. You can gain information from it for sure. In an emergency situation, testing can be very useful because it can dictate how we save this person's life,
Yeah.
right? But from a chronic disease risk or risk of something long term, I don't know that it gives us much help. And basically, I say that because testing is one snapshot in time of
Hmm.
one tissue in the body. Well, depending on what you're testing. If it's blood work, then it's one tissue in the body. And even like my CAC score, it told me I was very low risk, right?
Yeah.
That imaging exam. And guess what? 6 months later, here we are. And I
Yeah.
don't think that there's any like one test or group of tests that can definitely tell you what the risk is. So people were like, well, what do I do then? How do I know if I'm doing the right things? And there are some tests you can get that can measure the health of the artery or whatever. But again, it's one snapshot in time, and 5 minutes later, an hour later, it may be totally different.
Mm-hmm.
Same with cholesterol levels; like those can change drastically, and Dave Feldman has shown us that very quickly they
Yeah.
can change. And so I think that I like to say things like, well, I don't think testing determines risk. I think behavior does. And what you do and the environment you put your body in and day out, that's what's going to determine your risk more than any number on a test. I don't want to treat blood work or a number. I want to treat a person. And we have to, and
Hmm.
the same kind of thing. Like, I don't want to give your body a supplement or a drug or something like that that affects a number on blood work. I want to treat the person and put the person's body in an environment that creates health, because that is all the body is trying to do. It's trying to perceive your environment, take in what it needs from the environment, so that it can maintain order that is health. And if we can't do that, if our bodies are in a bad environment that we're depriving it of that, then it breaks down eventually over time, and we start to get this chronic disease. And in some cases, it can be very acute disease, like in my situation. So yeah, that's what I like to tell people about that. It's about getting your body in the right environment, which I'm sure the next question is, well, what's that right environment?
Well, I think what you're saying is what I hear about nutritional therapy and as an FDN practitioner that we're in nutritional therapy, it's all about the body's innate intelligence to restore it back to balance, to find homeostasis. So if we give the body the right parts and well, not you just said, it's not all supplements. And I agree, you can't out supplement poor lifestyle habits. I
Mhm.
say all the time, you can't out exercise poor nutrition habits. So it's a holistic approach, and you'll talk about next. But I think it's important to note that it isn't just blood work, you said, because that's just snapshot in time. But we hear that a lot. Peter Attia says to get APOB, and you want to keep it, he wants to push it down to 20 to 30. And some labs say it's, under 90 is good. And then there's LP little a, there's genetics. So all this stuff is helpful, but not 100% accurate. So you can't be confident. Okay, I'm free and clear. I'm not going to get any heart disease. But what are the environment you're talking about? What do we do to create that ideal environment so we can improve how we age, so we can eliminate ideally
Mhm.
chronic disease, as well as I'm going to talk more about cognitive decline, brain health, and all of that so we can strive to thrive.
Yeah. Well, my ideas about what this ideal environment are came from me studying how do I keep arteries healthy? How do I prevent this from happening again? Right. Um, and when we look at what heart disease is, whether it's atherosclerosis, this slowly forming narrowing of an artery, or an acute situation where a spontaneous clot formed, in my case, with no atherosclerosis present whatsoever.
Mhm.
Because when they did the heart cath to place the stent, they found no atherosclerosis. They just found a clot, this blockage there. And so when we look at what that stuff is, it's clotting tissue. It's
Mhm.
not an accumulation of cholesterol. When you analyze plaque in an artery, it's 87% plus or minus 8% clotting tissue. That's the majority of it. So what is clotting tissue? It's the same stuff that forms if I cut my skin and I need to form a scab, right, to stop the bleeding so my body can heal it. So clotting tissue is what your body uses in the short term so that your body can heal long term, so you don't bleed out, right? So if that happens in an artery, it's because the artery lining is being damaged. And it's being damaged so much that there's risk of the artery rupturing.
Mhm.
So it has to do something. If it can't repair it in time, like in a timely manner, like it's supposed to, the body has to do something else. And that is deposit clotting tissue. And so that's exactly what we see, is clotting tissue, is the formation there. And so then I asked myself, well, what causes clotting tissue to form, or what causes clotting? And Rudolf Virchow told us that way back in 1856, and it still holds true in medicine today. This is what they teach. What causes clotting is when we get damage to the lining of the artery, poor or stagnant blood flow, or when we get elements of blood that are too sticky. Our blood is too viscous, pretty much.
Mhm.
too thick. And so those things predispose us to this clotting material forming. And so I I understand, this mechanism, what's called structured water in the body,
Mhm.
and that the blood is half water, and the water in the blood has these unique properties in that it can form itself into sort of like a gel. It's called fourth phase water because it's not solid, liquid, or gas. It's more like a gel between ice and liquid. So you can think like the consistency of raw egg white. And there's a lot of research behind this from Gilbert Ling, from Dr. Gerald Pollack, from Maywan Ho, from James Clegg. Lots of different scientists have discovered this over many years. And the proof is that most of the water in my body is in this state, which means that's why if I touch my skin like this, it feels like a gel. It can bounce right back, but it gives. But the water in the blood is water, but can become a gel in the lining of the artery. And
Mhm.
if you study the properties of this structured water, it's fascinating because one, it forms this exclusion zone next to the thing that it forms on, which means that nothing can touch the thing that it's up against, meaning it protects the lining of the artery. That's why they call one of the nicknames for it is exclusion zone water. And also, it's responsible for the main way that blood moves. So the heart is not the main mover of the blood. That's a misconception that I talk about in my book. But this structured water formation actually creates blood flow with no need for a pumping heart or a pump of any sort. And so that keeps blood moving. And then also it forms around the elements of blood, which keeps the elements of blood separate and not clumped together, being sticky. So if you look at
Mhm.
what causes clotting and you look at what structured water does for us, then this is how we prevent clotting. And the thing that builds structured water the most in the body is infrared light.
Yeah.
And that makes
Yeah.
sense because the sun is 50% infrared light at all times, about 50% at all times. And humans are supposed to be outside. It is only recently that we started living inside under artificial lighting.
Yeah.
And so that's one mechanism by which heart disease is being more prevalent, as we're removing that source of protection from this clotting
Mhm.
material, and that is
Yeah.
infrared light. We went,
Yeah.
like in the 1950s, we went away from using firelight and incandescent bulbs, which are high in infrared, and away from sunlight to moving indoors under fluorescent and LED bulbs later on. And that's
Mhm.
one of the main stimuli. And so, when people ask me, well, how did you reverse this? I used an infrared sauna. I got sunlight. I did a lot of grounding, and I set my circadian rhythm. Those are the only things that changed for me. And
I
in
had
a
the
couple of
perfect day
years,
yesterday.
boom.
Hold on though. That's a good example. Yesterday, I woke up, I watched the sun set. I mean, the sunrise, but the moon set, and then we're
Mhm.
working in the yard, and then I went grounding, walking on the beach with sun setting at low tide with my feet in the water on the sand. So, and I moved dirt. So you're saying just getting outside and getting back to nature and living by sunrise, sunset is a good place to start. And then, sorry, I
Yeah.
interrupted you, but I was like,
No, not at
wait,
all.
that's
But yeah, like that is the environment that humans came from, right? And we have largely removed ourselves from that environment. So I have to kind of zoom out and give this big picture, understanding for people. Like, why does this make sense? So if you look at when heart disease started to rise, like coronary artery disease, like heart disease was present a little bit in the early 1900s, but it really became prominent in the 1940s and then really skyrocketed from the 50s. And what we've done is we removed that source of infrared light because, like I talked about, we moved indoors under fluorescent lighting rather than spending more time outdoors. We're convinced the sun is bad for us, causes cancer, which is not true. And then we added all these insults. We added this toxic food and these toxin exposures. So we remove the things that protects the artery.
piling the
We
buckets.
add then we add the things that damage the artery. We're talking about heavy metals, plastics, all this stuff that
Mm,
we've added, all the toxic foods, pesticides, and stuff. And then we interfered with the body's ability to heal arteries when they do get damaged, which is by
mm.
creating insulin and leptin resistance by being metabolically unhealthy. And so, that's driven by processed food diet and disrupted circadian rhythm. So that's kind of the trifecta that happened. But when you really zoom out, because what I've really come to understand and want to know and investigate it was what sustains life. How does life sustain itself? Because that seems
Mhm.
like a path to health if I figure out how life sustains itself. And so what I found is that all life is it's living things trying to gather energy from their environment so they can use that energy to create order in the body. And if you don't have enough energy to create order, you start to get disorder. And that disorder is the body slowly breaking down. And so our modern way of life is keeping us alive, but in low energy states where we're trying really hard to maintain order. And so what we need to do is maintain that energy. And so our body gets energy in many different ways. And that energy is stored in structured water. That's our body's energy storage form, is structured water, which we're mostly made of water. We know that. We hear that all the time. And so if that structured water doesn't hold enough energy, then it starts to break down. And then one thing that's left vulnerable is our arteries. But the ways we get energy are direct sunlight exposure. We can turn sunlight into electrons, energy, through DHA and melanin in the skin. Grounding, we can soak up energy directly from the earth through the connective tissue fascia of our body. Those electrons are conducted from the earth. And then we can also break down the chemical bonds in food and harvest electrons from that. We all know about this electron transport chain in our metabolism. Like that's what it is. So like we have to put our bodies in an environment that allows them to get energy from the environment. And food is not the only way that we get energy. And if you are trying to get all your energy from food, you're missing the boat. We've got to put our body in other environments so we can maintain this charge and maintain energy so our body can do its day-to-day task and stay healthy.
So we're really a battery, and we're needing to charge our batteries in different ways from
Yeah.
different sources, not just one source.
Yeah. Well, if you look at what structured water, I mean, that's exactly right. It's very well termed or really well said, because if you look at what structured water does, when structured water forms, like the chemistry of how it forms, like it cleaves off one of the hydrogens, which is a positive charge, and that leaves structured water connected together so that electrons can pass through it, and it has a bigger oxygen molecule that makes this very electronegatively charged structured water. And then the hydrogens that were cleaved off leave the space next to it very positively charged, and a positive next to a negative is a battery. So that's exactly what structured water is. And if we get this energy in the form of electrons, water will structure itself and create this battery, this energy storage for our bodies. People think that ATP is what powers the cell. And in my opinion, I don't think that's true. And Gilbert Ling disproved that there's no way that it could. And we have to get energy from somewhere else. And that is from our environment stored in structured water. So it's kind of the shift in thinking about this, but it also leads me straight to how we create health. And then you look at the literature and you see grounding and all the benefits of sunlight exposure, and all the benefits of a metabolically healthy diet and all these different things. It's like it's all because you're just basically increasing your body's ability to take energy and create order.
Hmm. So you're kind of like me. I go down all these rabbit holes and go, I don't, what does that mean? And then go down the next rabbit hole. What's the mechanism of action of that? All right. And then you go down another rabbit hole. So you're just breaking it down. But that's what I was just talking about, electron transport chain, or the other day of metabolism, trying to explain that, and nerdy solo podcast that I only enjoy it. But how's process, like what does this all mean to create energy and metabolic health and metabolism? But the important part of it, you're saying the structured water and how that breaks down and how we just need to recharge ourselves. Kind of like similar to like a Tesla, or I know, the batteries charging that as a car as a Tesla, but then they're also doing solar power energy. You're creating these battery storage houses. I was trying to understand that because I've been trying to sell us. Everyone needs to have this battery. So that's kind of what we're doing for energy for our house, and for our car is what we want naturally for our body. Is that any association with that
Yeah,
analogy?
exactly. I mean, it's all the same things. And if you start looking at what humans have quote unquote invented, and you look hard enough in the body, you'll see that it was already there in the body. We've already done it, right? The body's already done it. Or life has already done it. So it's very fascinating. Like solar panels or whatever. We change that light energy, which has no mass, into energy with something that we can concentrate and form mass into. So that involves changing it to electrons, right? And so that's exactly what DHA, which is a fatty acid that we find in our skin, as long as we're eating enough DHA and seafood and things like that, and grass-fed meats and stuff. DHA is a molecule that has what's called a pi electron cloud. And when light hits that pi electron cloud, the electrons get excited and it turns into a streaming current of electricity of electrons. And that's the photoelectric effect that Einstein discovered. It's literally right there in your body. And then also melanin, which we know is the pigment or the molecule in our skin that gives us the pigment of our skin, but it's also concentrated in many other places in the body, not just the skin. Melanin has the ability to take many forms of energy, including light, and take that energy and use it to dissociate water. Again, we're back to water. So melanin takes this energy, dissociates water into molecular hydrogen, oxygen, and electrons. That's what's created when light hits melanin. And that's the exact thing that your mitochondria need to make cellular physiology happen is oxygen, hydrogen, and electrons. And so like sunlight is this incredible source of energy for us. So if you are in the sun with feet on the ground, you are making energy. Your body is just literally churning out energy for your body. It's quite fascinating. And so if you look at, again, our modern way of life, we are largely removed. I mean, you picture, the person in a city who may never touch the ground all day long and working indoors under fluorescent lighting, they are getting no charge. And then they're
Mhm.
exhausted all day long. So they're trying to get energy from food and they're eating the wrong type of food and they're overeating the food because they should be getting energy from other places as well. And it's just this recipe for disaster for this person. And so the more we can get outside and get in contact with the earth and eat whole foods, it's going to be a game changer.
Yeah, it's kind of what I've been working on in my obviously in a glass house without
Yeah.
indoor lighting, but I totally thrive outside. And I know, I mean, we just said lived in Seattle, moved down here 4 years ago, and now I have this glass house and I wear my bare feet most of the day. And when I work in the house, I feel so claustrophobic and closed in. It's weird when you go
Mhm.
back into what you're used to now, this natural light. But I wanted to go back to, I have many comments, questions, but you're really we talked about cellular health when it comes to improving how we age and going back to the original conversations, avoiding heart disease and chronic diseases. But are you still saying it's at a cellular level? It's about the mitochondria, but not just focusing on ATP creation, but just all the other components to help get mitochondria stronger? Is that, and that you're talking about the arteries, but talk a little bit more,
Yeah,
just
so
the
every cell
focus.
in the body has mitochondria. Well,
Mhm.
aside from a few specific ones, but they all have mitochondria. And there's actually even mitochondria they found floating around the bloodstream on their own, um, without a cell around them. But yeah, the assumption was that mitochondria are there to make ATP, and then ATP is the energy currency of the cell. And like I said, Dr. Gilbert Lang disproved that very eloquently and very mathematically, disproved that ATP could ever provide enough energy for the whole cell to do all. I mean, it couldn't even. His calculations basically showed that it couldn't even provide enough energy for the sodium potassium pump to work
Mhm.
properly. If you believe the sodium potassium pump is there, which I don't, um, but uh, but yeah. So what is the job of ATP then? We know that it has an important function. The body's making it. Like, why is the mitochondria trying to make this ATP? The reason that it's using these electrons and passing hydrogens one way, going into complex 5 and making ATP is because ATP is a storage form of energy. And what it does is it helps unfold proteins, unfold cellular proteins.
Mhm.
Because what structured water needs to form is a biological surface, a water loving hydrophilic surface, which all biological surfaces are. So if we want the cell to be structured water, we need lots of surface area. And so if you have a protein that's all folded up like this in a fist, then it's not going to have as much surface area as if it's unfolded and there's ridges
Mhm.
and there's lots of different surface area, right? So what ATP does and why it's so important is because it unfolds those cellular proteins, that cytoskeleton, those microtubercular lattice of the cell, so that there's more surface area so structured water can form, so that your body stays this gel state, right?
Mhm.
And then when we have tubes of fluid in the body, the structured water is very important for providing the protection of those tubes and to keep things moving through the tubes in a frictionless type way. Because when you have structured water formation on something, it creates this frictionless barrier. So basically, things can slide past it super easy. So when you ice skate, there's a layer of ice, and then as you ice skate on top of that, the ice melts and the structured water forms on top of the ice. It doesn't form on the skate because that's not a hydrophilic surface, but it forms on top of the ice, and that's why you slide right across the ice. Same as if you took some ice out of your freezer and it stuck to you at first, but as soon as it starts to melt, structured water forms and it slips right out of your hand. So
Mhm.
structured water creates this frictionless surface, which is very important for when water is moving through something. So it's incredibly important to maintain the structured water, and infrared light is the main way that we do that. But grounding will also do it too. So yeah, like you're talking, a lot about endurance athletes with your audience, and there's evidence that lifelong endurance athletes have higher rates of coronary artery disease. There's this study they did at the 100 Marathon Club where these people had run 100 marathons to be in that club throughout their lifetime, and they had way more incidence of scar tissue in the heart and vascular disease.
Mm.
Now, I have no idea what type of diets these people are on. I don't know what their environment was outside of their exercise. There's so many different variables, but it just goes to show that something like intense endurance exercise like that can be harmful to the arteries if the arteries aren't protected. And so we have to protect them. And so that is infrared light exposure. So, I get as much sunlight as I can, infrared sauna, red light panels. Again, it would make sense because if there was no modern way of life, I would be outside all the time and infrared light every single day, all day long. So yeah.
With the red light, because I get those questions all the time, the red light's everywhere right now by face mask devices. There's different like flex beam views, but the benefit of it, you're talking about helps at a cellular level. So talk about a little bit more how it works and how do you know if it's working is a big question. People like, how do you know if it's doing anything?
Yeah.
So what
So,
does it do and why? How?
well, I mean, there's lots of studies that do show that there's these benefits to red light therapy, whether it's anti-inflammatory benefits or whatever, help with healing. And in my opinion, it's all doing that because red and infrared light build structured water. All forms of light will help build structured water. But infrared, especially far infrared, according to Dr. Pollack's lab, is the most beneficial at forming structured water. So the further you are down this red infrared wavelengths of light, which is the farthest side of things that comes from the sun is red and infrared, then the more structured water you're going to get. And so that's going to increase cellular health, like
In
we
your
just talked
cells,
about,
in your body.
right?
Yeah.
Right, because we're building structured water in cells, and that's how cells are supposed to work. They can't operate without that energy storage of a storage of energy and structured water in the cell. So we're doing that. But I always like to tell people that the reason this makes sense, the red light panels are helpful for us because again the sun has red and infrared light and it does all the time. When the sun is up, it has all that light, so it makes sense that naturally we would have gotten that, and now we're removed from it. So then we add it back and it seems like a therapeutic thing, but it's not a therapeutic thing. It's just replacing or giving your body something that it always had before you lived indoors outside of artificial light.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like to tell people that just because some red light or infrared light is good, it doesn't mean that a lot is going to be better, because I do think there's going to be a threshold where it's going to be negative. Just like
Mm-hmm.
indoor blue light today, there's blue light that comes from the sun. It's natural. Blue light is not evil. But when you get too much of it, because all you do is spend your time in front of screens and under artificial blue light or light that's very high in blue, it becomes negative. So if we had decided that red light was the best form or best way of lighting our indoor environments, we'd be thinking red light. We'd be saying, oh, red light's so bad for us because we're getting too much, right? And so there's like the threshold, and that's what the studies show on like red light laser therapies and stuff. There's like benefit, 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 and then eventually reach the threshold, and then it becomes negative, right? So it's about boosting your infrared exposure because we need it, because we're so deficient in it, but not overdoing it. And ideally, we're in the sun because that's the
Mm-hmm.
original form of things. It's always balanced with all the wavelengths and colors of light. It's the best. But if you can't do that in the modern world, you can use some devices, some modern devices to help improve that. So, but the main benefits I think are from structured water formation, which lots of the studies on red light don't mention because they don't necessarily understand that.
So you're not saying drink structured water, but get your body to improve the structured water content of the cells via light and grounding, the far infrared light and the red light.
Yeah, technically, I don't. I mean, there's just misnomer or not misnomer, but just discrepancies in nomenclature here. But like technically, you couldn't drink structured water, in my opinion, Because if it was truly structured, it'd be like trying to drink Jello. Like you're like,
Mm,
it's gonna be like this
collagen.
gel-like form of thing,
Yeah.
right? Kind of like if you put bone broth in the fridge and it's got good gelatin, it turns into the gel. You're trying to drink that. But you can drink water that's more energized. So you can make sure that your water is toxin free and mineral rich, and you can do something to it to help increase the coherence or the interaction between the water molecules so that it more readily structures itself when it gets next to that biological surface in your body. So that's what I do with my water. I detoxify it completely with reverse osmosis, put minerals back into it, and then I structure it in some way. I put it in the sunlight or I swirl it around in my
Mm,
glass because the movement of water is what creates coherence of it, which is why water is always moving in nature. It's never stagnant. So and if
mm,
it is stagnant, it's dirty and it's dead, kind of
mm-hmm.
dead water.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. And this is just a fascinating tidbit. Like I mentioned that the heart's role is not to move blood. Its role is to actually structure or to energize water because it's
Mm,
vortexing it as it moves through the heart, which is
okay.
something else I discuss in my book. But that's why it's there. So it's very important for the flow of blood, but not in the way that we think.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
So what about hydrogen water? Because there's a lot of that. And I know I have a bottle that you can make hydrogen water. Does that
Yeah.
do anything?
Yeah, so hydrogen and water and those ions are incredibly beneficial as far as like potent antioxidants. And you can, if you want to make and drink hydrogen water, that's totally fine. And I have no issue with that. However, just so people know, if I can't afford that machines or whatever, I can't afford to buy it, then your body makes hydrogen water, or makes molecular hydrogen when you get sunlight exposure, like I talked about with melanin. Melanin takes that sunlight energy, dissociates water into molecular hydrogen, oxygen, and electrons. So if you want that molecular hydrogen, you can get sunlight exposure on your skin, on your melanin in your skin. And the more melanin you create, like the darker you get as you get tanner, the more of that you're making. But yeah, hydrogen water, super smart thing to do. Yeah.
Sure. So the Goldilocks effect for everything, not too much, not too little, the right amount.
Yeah.
Same with the sun, because I know I'm in North San Diego. I swim usually at lunchtime an outdoor pool for master swim class. And I see people that have lived here their whole life, and I don't want to get all wrinkly. So,
Mhm.
what if there's too much sun, it damages your skin? Or what are your thoughts on that? If you're too much in the sun, you look like a prune.
Well, we have to kind of so it damages the skin in what way? Like damages the skin, like you get wrinkly and your body builds up like this callus almost, like for
You look
for
like a
absorbing
raisin. How
sun.
about that?
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
like
Like, and that's not something
something
that
about
aesthetically we want, right? And so I totally get you there. So it's about, but in a minute I'll address that I don't think the sun would ever cause skin cancer, just based on the literature, and based on logic. But yeah, so we don't want to look like that though. So yeah, get an appropriate amount, and
Mhm.
even if you're in the shade, there's a bunch of infrared from the sunlight hitting around you reflecting onto you, so even if you spend your 30 minutes to an hour in the sun, you're still going to get tons of infrared just from being outside in the shade, right? And then you can protect your skin more so you're not going to look like that. But we do need a certain amount of sunlight every single day if we can get it, which in San
Mhm.
Diego that's easier to do than in
Mhm.
lots of places in the world. But as far as like that skin damage, so to speak, from the sun, that makes no sense whatsoever. How did humans not all die of skin cancer whenever we had to live outside 100% of the time? That doesn't make sense. But if you look at um, the studies that show that UVB light causes skin cancer are done with a UVB light lamp, where UVB light is the only form of light they're shining on the subjects, right? Or the rats or whatever they're doing it on, which would never happen naturally. There's never only UVB light. And so it's always a full spectrum. It's always a certain timing of the day. So it makes no sense that it does that. And so that's one caveat. The other is that there's actually studies that show that processed blue light, LED lighting that's high in blue, causes the changes in skin cells that lead to skin cancer, in mice, that is. And then also there's studies that these are just associational studies, that show that people, like this study was done in the Navy, people who spend more time in indoor jobs in the Navy, usually behind screens of some sort, had way more skin cancer than people who had outdoor jobs in the Navy. And their skin cancer was not in a place like the head and neck and arms that you would think gets more sun exposure. It was on the trunk. So lack of UVB, in addition to high UVA, some other studies have shown that imbalance is what creates skin cancer. Lack of UVB and too much UVA. And you know what does that? Double pane windows.
Mm.
That's exactly what we're all living behind, right? So right now my window is cracked, so I'm getting more light than just that kind
Mm-hmm.
of double paned through here because that filters out the UVB, but lets in the UVA, and that's the imbalance that we're getting, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
direct imbalance that's been shown to cause skin cancer. So, is it that we're getting too much sun that's causing skin cancer, or is it that we're living under artificial light behind windows? That's the question that the research is kind of leading us toward.
That's so interesting. And with the cholesterol topic, I know
Mm.
I just was listening to Ben Bickman in 30 minutes, he has a metabolic classroom video on YouTube that's really interesting. But talking about again, all the studies, you also have to look at what are the studies done on who, were they humans or mice, and then look at the whole protocols. But the cholesterol myth he was talking about, one example was they're injecting cholesterol into the body, not eating cholesterol and saturated fat. No, it was about saturated fat. Sorry, saturated
Yeah.
fat
Yeah.
in your diet versus injecting saturated fat. But just how people, the fear of cholesterol is always around, especially, we're more in the keto carnivore world. But those that, if you eat meat every day, I'm going to get high cholesterol. And people that get their lab work done, they're freaking out that the cholesterol is 220, 250. So any summary of what you've come to grips on the cholesterol? I know that's a big, full,
Yeah,
multi-day
and I can attack it in so
conference.
many different ways.
Yeah.
I mean, from a logical standpoint, again, it doesn't make sense. Like humans have been eating meat and saturated fat and cholesterol for it turns there's even evidence that the first modern humans were entirely carnivore. Back when there was Neanderthals and the first modern humans. So you could just think about it from that perspective. You could learn about the whole history of the heart disease, the cholesterol theory of heart disease, and Ansel Keys, and how it was fraudulent science, and how there was lots of money backing the theory from pharmaceutical and food industry that wanted the idea to take hold, so that they could sell more processed food and more statin drugs. Like so, that throws some doubt into the theory. Then there's people that say, well, it's not just the total cholesterol and LDL, it's the ApoB, it's the LP little a, like all these different things. In my opinion, based on everything I've looked at, this whole idea that lipids in the blood or a certain ratio of lipids or whatever is the cause of a whole disease process has been a huge distraction from the actual causes of heart disease, which I already outlined. Lack
Mm-hmm.
of infrared light, lack of structured water, adding the insult, interfering with the repair mechanisms that are supposed to happen. That's the recipe for heart disease. And everybody over here is overanalyzing lipids and obsessed with the blood work, which Dave Feldman has shown us that it changes dramatically day to day. And there's studies that show that people admitted to the hospital having a heart attack, 75% of them have normal cholesterol levels. But that's just one snapshot in time. It doesn't really tell us anything. And so, and obviously treating cholesterol with statin drugs, which are either number one or number two prescribed drugs behind opiates every single year, is not working, right? We're getting higher, we're still have the highest rates of heart disease of any country in the world. It's not the approach you need to. So lowering cholesterol, people have heart attacks and develop atherosclerosis on statin drugs all the time. And so what do lipids tell us, right? So what's your they basically tell us what our body's choosing to metabolize at the time. So if you're on a more low carb diet and your body's burning more fatty acids to gain electrons and get energy, then it has to deliver those fatty acids to the cells. And the way it does that is through LDL molecules. So if the only energy source from food that you're giving yourself is LDL or is fatty acids, then the LDLs have to go up to deliver more fatty acids. So that's this lean mass hyperresponder that Dave Feldman talks about. And I think that this happens to some extent to everybody, the shift in metabolism. But in some people, they
Mm-hmm.
have this dramatic increase in LDL. And so if you ate more carbohydrates, then your body could use that glucose and wouldn't have to deliver as many fatty acids to the cells, and the LDL would come down. And so when you look at what happened Like that's what happens. And there's studies that show that. Dave Feldman's published some, and Nick Norwitz gave a really good N of one experiment where he went on a low carb diet, his LDL went up, and then he ate Oreos and his LDL dropped.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then he went on the low carb diet again, his LDL went back up, and they took statins, and the Oreos worked better than the statins. So it's basically about metabolism. That's what we're seeing here. And all the associational studies that say that cholesterol is causing heart disease, there's just as many associational studies that say they don't. And there's people, if you study people with familial hypercholesterolemia, which is genetically high cholesterol levels, some of those people get heart disease and some of them don't. So if it was cholesterol, everybody would have, but they don't.
Mm.
And the difference between the people who did and who didn't was that the people who did had a genetic tendency to clotting, which we've already talked about. This is clotting
Mhm.
issue. This is a clotting tissue order or disorder. And so that's the real difference, preventing clotting, not micromanaging your blood work, your lab work, right? And understanding that your lipids are going to change day to day. They're going to change based on what your diet is, not because of you're eating more saturated fat cholesterol, but because you're telling your body to burn something rather than something else. And so then people talk about LP little a. What's that? Well, LP little a is a molecule that it encourages the prevention of breakdown of clotting tissue. So if you develop clotting tissue and you have high LP little a, it's more likely that clotting tissue is going to stay around. So this LP little a is associated with more plaque formation, right? But that doesn't mean it's causing it. It's just preventing the breakdown of it. So if you have this high LP little a, which is somewhat genetically determined, you're not really going to change that. So how do we prevent that from becoming an issue? We prevent the formation of clotting tissue in the first place by protecting our arteries with structured water. The ApoB thing is kind of ridiculous. It has more to do with your genetic lipid pattern. I don't know that you can influence it that much. And it tends to track with LDL. Like what your LDL level is going to be what your ApoB is. So if your LDL goes up, your ApoB may go up. But here's the thing. If I if I build structured water in my arteries, and I've given talks on this and they're on my YouTube channel. If I build structured water in my arteries, it's called an exclusion zone, right? Because the way that it forms, it literally allows the only thing that can penetrate structured water is very small hydrated ions of minerals, like anything potassium or smaller. Um, and if you look at the size of red blood cells and lipoproteins, they're all way too big. If you have structured water forming on your arteries, there's no way the LDL is going to get to the lining of your artery. And even if the structured water breaks down, the LDL doesn't just say, "Oh, I'm going to go in and embed myself in the lining of the artery," because what we find in atherosclerosis is clotting tissue. Very little, if any of it, is cholesterol. There's some present because it's involved in the process of developing clotting tissue and things like that, but it's mainly clotting tissue. So this is a clotting tissue disorder. It's a hemodynamic, like blood flow issue disorder. It is not a blood lipid disorder. And that's been a giant distraction from the actual causes. And guess what? This rounds things out very nicely. I told people the story of how I reversed plaque in my arteries. But guess what? My lipids, my ApoB looked horrible according to Western medicine. And I still completely reversed a 99, up to 99% blockage of plaque in my body because I did it with light and with infrared, with structured water formation. I protected my arteries. I gave it a chance to heal itself, and that's powerful. I'm a one person experiment, but again, they told me that was impossible, and that I would get more plaque if I didn't take a statin and all this stuff, and I did the opposite. So people need to know that, and so that they can have that information.
So how do we know if we have poor cellular health with poor structured, we need more structured water? So what are you saying
Well, there's
then?
no real test for measuring like your
Yeah.
structured water formation, but I guess like when I think of like your body holding charge, it's holding that charge in the form of electrons. And so if you are in a state of inflammation or oxidative stress, basically means you're deficient and you're in a deficit of electrons, right? Because like oxidative stress is like this idea that this free radical molecule is looking for electrons. It doesn't have enough. So it has to go steal it from a tissue and cause damage to the tissue.
Hmm.
So if we have enough electrons around that can quench those free radicals properly, then we have enough charge, we have enough electrons. And so generally you could say that things that reflect the inflammation in your body, are probably the best indication of your cellular health, your body inflammation, your body charge. Do you have enough structured water and electrons in your body? So that could be things like high sensitivity C-reactive protein. I mean, you could measure so many inflammatory markers, all the interleukins, TNF alpha, all this stuff, GGT, which is a liver enzyme, lots of different stuff like that. I mean, there's even ones that are specific to like inflammation to the lining of the artery, like myeloperoxidase or LPPLA 2, those types of things, which are kind of obscure tests that aren't as commonly taken unless you get like really in-depth heart workup or whatever, or even just like a erythrocyte sedimentation rate, an ESR, which is a measurement of how readily your red blood cells clump together when they're taken out of your blood. And so again, if there's enough structured water and enough electrons, then the red blood cells are going to stay evenly spaced, because the negative charge around the red blood cells gives them a like charge, and like charges repel each other, so they don't stick together. But if you get an ESR and they clump together too fast, that means there was low structured water on them to begin with. So all these things can be an indication, but again, they're just snapshots in time. You know, if you're sitting in that lab on artificial light, disconnected from the earth, and you
Mm,
get your blood work
true.
drawn, it may look worse than if
Mm,
you were outside under in sunlight with your feet on the earth, getting that blood
hmm
drawn. And there's live blood analysis things that show the difference, you know, like of red blood cell spacing and things like that after, before and after grounding and stuff. So yeah, lots of fascinating things to think about. And it's all just fascinating. Imagine keep going down these rabbit holes.
I would do that too. So really, I would say you don't know what you don't know, but to be a health optimizer, there's things that you can't maybe test to be 100% accurate that I'm cleared. I'm not going to get chronic disease. My heart's healthy. I'm doing everything I can do. So we can't really find tests that maybe just, as you said, CRP and different inflammatory markers that hopefully are on your comprehensive blood panel, but really just being preventative, taking action now, no matter what, by doing the grounding, doing the red light therapy, using your infrared sauna, getting out in the sunlight during the day. Those are all important parts, along with what other lifestyle habits and nutrition, stress and sleep and exercise.
Yeah.
I see a
Yeah,
cat
definitely.
tail with it.
Yeah, there's a cat trying to interrupt our interview
See
here.
this thing
He does this sometimes. But
snivel.
yeah, no, I mean it's like, well, I think the most important thing is people get blood work and it says, oh look, it's normal, it's great, right? And then look what happened to me. And mine look great, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that happened. So most important thing I would encourage people to do is don't use blood work as your benchmark, your only benchmark, to say that I'm healthy and I can keep doing what I'm doing. Like you're always looking for more and better things, which is why I'm trying to spread this information so people can look for more and better things to do. Don't use it. Don't wait till the thing happens, despite what blood work says, to take action, right? So always be trying to put your body in an environment, even if you feel great now. Like if people tell me this all the time, I work with clients online and they're like, do you want my blood work? And I'm like, yeah, sure, you can send it. I'll tell you what I think. They're like, oh, it's not like essential. And I'm like, well, no, not necessarily, because what I'm going to tell you doesn't necessarily depend on the blood work. You know, it can be helpful. I can help explain that to you, help you make sense of it. You can use blood work to motivate you if there's something that's really off and you want to try and get it better. That's helpful. But the answer, like if your blood work looks terrible or it looks great, the answer to making it not terrible or keeping it great are the same things. And those are the things that we've discussed here today, from my perspective. Some of the things, there's other things, but that we could do. But that's that kind of the solution, you know. So don't use blood work as an excuse to maintain the pattern you're in. You know, keep achieving or striving for higher levels of health. And that may not be 2 more miles on your run. It may be something totally different, you know, that you need to add so that you can keep doing that extra 2 miles on your run. You know.
Well, it makes me think of what I do Pinoy metabolism testing and trying to throw that, correlate that with my holistic method. But it's working on what that might identify if people have those areas of opportunity. Because a lot of the suggestions are in the reports. You need more red light therapy,
Mm.
infrared, nature walking, grounding. But I've been wondering if you see any differences if people are not metabolically healthy, if we can add in more of this type of lifestyle habits you're speaking about to help improve their metabolic health,
Yeah,
metabolism at a
definitely.
cellular level.
Yeah, I mean, metabolic health is incredibly important because if your mitochondria aren't functioning, not producing the electron transfer are not functioning, and the ATP is not getting produced. You're not unfolding proteins. You're not holding cellular charge. Cells are sick,
All connected.
right?
What?
So we've got to maintain the metabolic health, which the main ways we do that are a, to me, animal-based, lower carbohydrate, doesn't mean completely animal food diet, but a lower carbohydrate diet. Historically, when fruit was in season, or if we came across honey, was the only place we would have really found carbohydrates. And it's okay to eat them. I'm not going to say that you don't eat them, but because I think that we do need them sometimes. But generally, our diet should be focus on protein, animal-based, lower carbohydrate, and then circadian rhythm. That's incredibly important. Set your circadian
Mhm.
rhythm. Be very conscious of your light environment and artificial light after sunset, because that, I think, is what starts the fire of poor metabolism, is when your light environment's off. And then the processed food diet is just fuel to the fire. So people
Mhm.
go off the processed food and they notice all these changes and they're all these benefits. They lose tons of weight and all this stuff, and that's awesome. But if you ever want that fire to completely go out, you got to set the circadian rhythm too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So it's just really how to charge the cells and make them function at optimal level. What
Mhm.
about NAD? I know we got to wrap up, but anything correlation, if NAD is a big topic lately, and a lot of clinics
Mhm.
are doing NAD
Yeah,
injections, maybe.
I think that all these different things that we're finding out, as far as whatever it may be, these different substances like NAD or whatever it may be, um, they can be helpful in a short-term kind of way. So someone who's super sick or has just decided they're not going to make the changes, these things could be helpful for them in a short-term kind of way, but they're going to keep needing it, until they optimize the metabolism and they optimize their environment. They're going to keep needing it. They're going to keep needing that crutch of something.
Yeah.
So they're important strategies because they can be the thing that gets somebody over the hump. Like they may feel so terrible and they just need something to help them feel better so they can get motivated to actually make the changes,
Hmm.
and that's the place I see for all these different types of lots of different biohacking type of things, whether it's taking glutathione or whatever it may be. It's all things that can help push us in the direction so that we don't need them, right? Eventually.
Yeah.
But that could be a while, and people need support in that time to get them through that.
So it's really going back to ancestral health and the proper human diet.
Proper human
And
environment. Yeah, that's what
yeah,
I
and
would say.
environmental is the key word I keep hearing that I was just writing down. It's more your environment that we need to repair and
Hmm.
redesign.
Hmm. Yeah,
Stop
definitely.
remodeling your house, but
Yeah,
remodel your outdoor lifestyle
yeah,
habits and your routine. I always think about it, it's how you start your day and how you end your day. And I was think since COVID that mealtime doesn't mean eat, it means get outside and move. People get stuck in just being indoors all day. But I think just
yeah.
simple habits, and guess what? They don't cost anything.
That's
That's the
right.
best part.
A lot of I mean, there's a lot of these things are free. The sunlight is free,
Yeah.
grounding is free. When you eat a good diet and you feel satiated, you'd be surprised how cheap that's going to be. You're going to eat less. And you can buy, I have my feet are on a grounding mat right now, like indoor grounding products, and you can buy the expensive things too, but a lot of it is free. You just got to get out there and utilize it and learn about how to best do it. Like setting your circadian rhythm is largely free. Blue light blocking glasses can be very helpful, which would be might be the only expense. But other than that, it can be very inexpensive to do this and change your environment in a way that's conducive to that.
So change your environment's kind of the main takeaway. And you have three books. You want to talk about your books and anything coming up in the 2025? I can't believe we're
I know.
going to a new year, space age, but talk about what's on your agenda and where people can learn more and read more about all
Yeah.
this.
My books are The Health Evolution, which was my first attempt at a book, and it's just basically a big picture understanding of, from an evolutionary perspective, why we have chronic disease. The second book is Understanding the Heart, which I wrote kind of in response to the heart attack and everything I've learned about the heart. Although I could make it so much longer now, I have so much more, and hopefully I get the chance to one day. And then my third book just came out a few months ago. It's called Pain Sense, And it's kind of my response to the opioid epidemic and the chronic pain epidemic that we're having, and a lot of quantum and light-based principles and things in that book. So those books are on my website, which is resourceyourhealth.com. And that's where I run my health consulting. My blog is on there and things like that. And then as far as what I'm up to in 2025, it looks like a lot of podcasts, not as many speaking engagements, but a lot of podcasts. And I've recently been working on courses, more up to date stuff about the heart and heart disease, and those are on my website as well. And I have plans to make a few more courses and things. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now.
Good. Good. Well, I think you need to, yeah, educate and share this information. The best way is podcasting and YouTube videos and
Hmm.
educational courses people can go through to get that information and do something with it. And as you said, creating a new environment, but yeah, education is really important if you want to improve how you age. And that's the mission, as I said, beginning of the show, is what I focus on, especially watching my dad passed away of a heart attack 2 years ago and kidney issues and some cancer. It's like, wait, this doesn't make sense. And you really start to get passionate about it as you're aging when you watch your family or you're young and having this happen. It's like, why does this doesn't need to happen? What's wrong? What's broken inside? And get the body's own innate intelligence, restore the body back to cellular level health, and get, as you said, we're the right charge or battery charge, and reset, recharge ourselves for living life. And I don't
Hmm.
think a lot of this diseases that we get are necessary. And it's just so much of it, as you're talking, simple, your environment. So I appreciate
Yep.
that.
Yeah, of course.
Well, amazing. Thanks for sharing that. We'll make sure everyone looks into the books and put all the links in the show notes. And I have so many questions we can go down different rabbit holes. So anytime you want to go into another one, because we're actually another question we'll talk about another time is the vagal nerve, because we're doing a webinar
Mm.
on that in January with two other people on the vagal nerve stimulation and measuring heart rate variability. But it'd be great for like what your thoughts are on that too. So maybe we'll talk in a couple
Yeah, I'd love
months and
to.
go how that's connected. All right. Thanks, everyone.